be going as soon as we can because our presenters tend to be a little wordy.
He was the presenter last time.
Yeah.
He was worried.
Yeah. So welcome, and these new faces, not commonly seen faces. So we're going to get right into it. First of all, we want our treasurer's report and our secretary's report. Our secretary isn't here tonight, so Shirley is doing both.
So first, I want you all to know that we have 23,000 with another 1,000 pledged for our restoration fund. So we're moving slowly but surely. Our balance after paying the insurance, and I pay the electricity bill every month, whether we use it or not, we have to pay that then. We have $534.73 in the checking account. Plus we have our 2 CDs, which we haven't cashed in. We had 3. I cashed in one when we acquired the building in order to pay the insurance, and I haven't cashed the other 2 in. I think it's like $3,000 or something. I don't have my balance sheet tonight, but it was last time I had the balance sheet. I've been working too much on my day job that pays me. Okay, September meeting held at the town office was brought to order by President Henry Hamilton. Secretary Ethel Turner read the minutes of the last meeting in June, prepared by Jean Hankins in her absence. Treasurer Shirley Hamilton handled out a detailed report of our finances. President Hamilton gave a report on the town hall detailing an idea presented by Ken Bartow, which would raise not just the building itself, but the entire lot. This would prevent us from losing our spot on the National Register. Archivist Jean Hankins gave the following announcements. The November 3rd meeting will be held at the town office, and the program title is Otisfield Historians from Holden to Hankins. Welcome. There is a new system of meeting notification utilizing emails. A sign-up sheet was passed around to collect addresses and to indicate those without email access. And do we have that again?
Yes, I'm going to start it right
So
now.
that will come again for those of you who weren't here last time so that we can be more connected with you. Jean also gave an update on the ongoing survey of 50-year-old buildings in town. Some surveyors have resigned, so the group is looking to recruit new members for the project. The program of the evening was a fascinating look into the 1918 Spanish flu epidemic, given by our president, Henry Hamilton. And I'm going to read the highlights of this so that we don't take too much time. This global disaster resulted in more deaths in 1 year than in 4 years of the bubonic plague. 675,000 American deaths were recorded. There was not a lot of publicity about this flu at that time because of the commencement of the First World War. All countries except Spain had wartime censorship, so the first cases were reported from Spain, hence the Spanish flu. It was then attributed to a virus, which infected humans, birds, and animals. The astonishing thing was the speed of replication. It was a very powerful virus and killed healthy young people. Generally, viruses are species-specific, but in this case, a shift happened and the virus changed radically all the time. In this country, USA, the Spanish flu came in 3 waves. First in Kansas at Fort Riley, then Boston as soldiers returned home to Fort Devens, and then everywhere as those soldiers went to their homes. To emphasize the risk of that time, Henry and Bruce Baker played the parts of Monsignor
Donna
and Dr. Epstein, respectively. The heart of the debate was the closure of churches versus factories, which remained open. The doctor had the last word, declaring all public gatherings unsafe. In Maine, there was no mention of flu until the second wave. Public gatherings were banned. In Otisfield, regular activities continued, according to George Howard Dyer, who was interviewed on the subject before his death. Fortunately, the rural lifestyle helped protect them. This was Howard's words. Howard himself had the flu in 1919, but he suffered deafness in 1 year the rest of his life. Statistics reveal that the war killed 21 million. The flu killed at least 50 million, and more likely 100 million. In the state of Maine, 200,000 were infected and 5,000 died. So Otisfield got off lightly. And Henry's moral of the story last session was, so stay in Otisfield if you get enough. Respectfully submitted, Ethel Turner, Secretary. Thank you.
Okay, I see. No schoolmate here is taking lots of notes. I'll save you a little.
Oh, Bridget, thank you.
So we've got lots of new business, new news tonight, and we're going to start out with some from Jean.
Yes, I'd like to report two recent acquisitions to our archives. The first comes from our esteemed selectman, Hal Ferguson, who gave me this box of Civil War letters that belong to him, written by Algernon Scribner, and we didn't get them in time for our Civil War program, but I transcribed them, and he gets a copy, and we get a copy, and everybody wins, so thank you very much. They're very good letters. He died during the Civil War. He's buried at Bell Hill.
Yes, he is.
Yeah, so you can have these back anytime.
Okay, thank you.
And we appreciate your letting us have them because they're precious.
Certainly.
Okay, the second thing arrived last night at the Harrison Historical Society. I went over, and I can't pronounce the name right. Borden is not, Borden Scribner of Harrison has given us two things. First, some of you will recognize this little bundle of documents. This is the 19th century filing system for town records. And these are a few Otisfield town records. How he came by them, I don't know. But we are going to do things with them. They go back to 1800. They're over 200 years old. We're going to flatten them. We're going to humidify them and flatten them and so that they can be stored properly. Okay. And then the other thing was this notebook. And I thought, oh, it's an old account book, and it's not going to be very interesting. But then I opened it up. And please don't handle this, because these are pretty fragile. Inside the notebook, I don't know if you can see it, are these other documents. I think they are the same. I think they were documents that were originally in that bundle, and they were put in this book to flatten them out. And as it turns out, they are very flat and in very good shape. Also, Otisfield records. The newest one I've seen is 1840. And so they're going way back, all sorts of things. I haven't had a chance to look at them very carefully, but this is a major find, and we're delighted to have them. We're going to do things with it, but I'm going to ask you not to handle this because it's just too precious. But you can look at the outside.
We'll await your transcriptions.
And we're very grateful. So, Mr. Scribner, we don't quite know how he happens to have it, but I think he's a Scribner from the Scribner Mills. So anyone that used to Van Conant knows, and he understands the connection. He knows who his mother was. Yeah, so we'll talk about that before the meeting. Okay, that's all I have to say, Henry, for now.
Okay. Some more new news. Well, the military, I was assigned to Peshawar, Pakistan, and I was hired to tutor Pakistanis who are, if you go to higher education in Pakistan, it has to be in English, and so I tutored English to students that were getting ready to go to the University of Peshawar. And I got to be a good friend of the head of the English department there at Edwards College. And his son became my traveling partner and best friend. And in 1968, I brought him to America. We attended the University of Maine together. He was smarter than I was. He got full scholarships after his first year. Then he got a scholarship to Orono for his master's degree. Then he got a scholarship to Harvard for his PhD in international law. His first job was with Chase Manhattan Bank. He's been living in London for the last 35 years, and he's a multimillionaire. So when he found out about the old townhouse,
You just happened to find out.
yes, he just happened to find out. I did mention to him he runs a eye clinic in Pakistan, free eye clinic for children. And I says, I know you give most of your money to that eye clinic, but this year, you know, if there's any extra donations you'd like to lower your high taxes, the Otisfield Historical Society would be interested. He called me up the next day and says, well, you know, I usually give my alma mater $10,000 a year. But this year, whatever amount that the folks of Otisfield can raise, I will match up to $10,000. And what this means is, if we can match this, we can put a basement under the old townhouse next summer. So we'll be starting a fundraising campaign in February because we don't want to compete with the Bell Hill money-raising campaign that's going on right now. And I certainly hope that over the next year we can match those funds, get them all. Harvard doesn't need it as much as we do. The other thing about raising the whole property, that's a lot of fill. We came up, Bruce Baker suggested that we contact the companies around that do excavation and let them know that we've got a place for them to put their stuff. There are trees in the way, so I suggested that we offer to people in town all of those trees for your firewood if you'd like to take them down. We'll see how that works. And the reason I wanted those letterheads, which you forgot to leave with me the other night, is I want to write the excavation companies like this, PJ, K&K, and just let them know that we would consider a load of fill to be a donation.
We're very generous, yeah.
You can get a tax deduction for that. So we're working on it, and we're hoping to see some big strides this year. Also, in front of the old townhouse, a huge old ash tree probably was there when certainly was there when this was Massachusetts. And anyway, Irene, remember her a few months ago? Took off one of the limbs. Fortunately, it was the roadside limb. So that old tree endangers the old townhouse. And so we are looking into getting it down. Q Tree wanted $1,000 for taking it down and taking it away. I'm going to contact them and suggest that they just lay it down, and I'm looking for someone in town who would like to cut it up for the wood. So that's that. And so, would there be anything else before we get on with the program?
Thank anybody who wants to pay membership or donation.
Yes, membership and donations. We have a little fishbowl here, and it says donations on the side of it. And so there's cookies and drinks. Of course, they're free, but if you want to put in a donation, we'll accept that. So, without wasting any more time here,
Thank you.
we will invite Jean right up here.
Okay, we're going to talk about Otisfield Historians. I'm going to try to make this informal. How many of you knew Bill Spurr? Terrific. Feel free to interrupt those of you who knew Bill Spurr if I say something wrong, or if you say something that's interesting. This is an informal talk. I don't have to hear statement. I'm going to kind of wing it. We're going to start with Bill Spurr. The reason we're starting with Bill Spurr, he is not, according to my list, the first Otisfield historian, but he is the most important. And when we first arrived at Otisfield, he was the only one anyone knew anything about. This is a picture of Bill Spurr taken fairly late in life. He died in 1977. His obituary was so stark. I've got a copy of it someplace. Let's see if I can find it. His obituary was about 10 lines long. Said something to the effect that he wrote the history of Otisfield, and that's about it. Trying to find.
I think it's on the back of this page, it says historian's outline.
Too many notes, okay, I'm going to read it to you.
Yeah, it's just a paragraph. It says son of and.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have it. It's somebody else's obituary. Any rate, what else you can find?
Oh, it's Fernald,
Yeah.
sorry.
It's about 5 lines long. It does not mention that Bill Spurr also wrote the vital records of Otisfield, Maine. It says very little about it. He was married and the marriage did not last. He lived his whole life in Otisfield. He was a relatively uneducated person who produced a great book. I'm going to talk about the book more later. I'm going to talk more right now about I am going to talk about the book, excuse me. I'm going to say that it was modeled after other town historians. William Lapham's histories of Woodstock, Ben, I write on that, Woodstock, Paris, did you write the Paris?
In Norway, Bethel.
Yeah, it was, I think Spurr's book was modeled on those other town histories. For Spurr, history was a combination of 2 things, biography and documents. He didn't see history as a narrative, a story at all. This book is incomplete. The last half of it, as many of you know, is genealogy, is people. The first half of it is mostly documents. There's no story in here. There's a section on churches, there's a section on mills, a section on general stores. There's a whole section of town meeting records. He just throws them at you. Occasionally he makes a comment, but he doesn't try to give his take on it. It's not a narrative, it's a document. And that makes the book very valuable, because he doesn't interpret what his material is. Okay. But the question is, where did he get his material? He's got wonderful stories, he's got great details, in particularly the genealogical section. Where did he get them? Well, when we first came to Otisfield, I didn't know where he got them. I assumed that he just knew this stuff somehow. It turns out, shortly after we arrived, in 1993, these little books turned up. It says, they're kind of homely little things, Otisfield, Maine. And inside is a typescript. You may look at this, that's all right. And it is called Early Settlers of Otisfield by Grinfill B. Holden, transcribed by Marguerite Lovewell. Okay, she's on the chart. I quickly made a photocopy of this book. There were 2 volumes, 1 and 2, and I'm going to talk about them later. And then it never occurred to me that there might be more to it than that. There might actually be a Holden manuscript. And then in the town vault, this book turned up. And this is, lo and behold, Grinville Holden's manuscript. And so and if you look at what he's writing and you look at what Spurr's writing, it's the same thing, almost. Not exactly. Sometimes there's more in Spurr than there is here. But all these wonderful stories that Spurr tells started with Holden. Most of them, not all of them. Well, then the question came. She's got 2 volumes. This is only 1 volume. Where is the other volume? Is there another volume? No. I have spent a lot of time recently looking back and forth between the Lovewell transcript and this. And it turns out that it doesn't correlate quite. Everything in there came from here, but not necessarily in the right order. I think there is no volume 2. I think what she did in 1922, she prepared this book. It's alphabetical, it starts with Anderson, it goes through to Young. There's a sketch on all these Otisfield pioneers. And then I think she put it aside for 7 years, and then decided, remember in these days we couldn't photocopy. She wanted to make another copy. She started, but she had a little more material, either of her own or someplace else. They are not exactly the same, but they cover the same stuff. So, in other words, Cleveland will be in here, and Cleveland will be in here. Ebenezer Camp, your ancestor, is in both of them. But it's a little bit different. But it's all coming from Holden. So I think she was starting a second draft, is what it amounted to. Unfortunately, it's very confusing, but both survived. And she does add some of her own knowledge. All these people were Otisfield natives. I'm going to talk a little bit more about Grinfill Holden, though. Grinfill Holden was the grandson of David Ray. David Ray was one of the very early pioneers. He's the man for whom Rayville is named. But Rayville at one time was known as Holdenville, because David Ray had no sons. He had several daughters. He had a big family of daughters, one of whom married Grinfill Holden's father. So he's his grandfather, and Grinfill Holden grew up hearing all these stories and recording them. He did a lot of research. And in Spurr's introduction, he acknowledges his dependence on Holden. He sent a large part of the material in this book regarding the early settlers was compiled many years ago by Granville B. Holden. He gathered much of his information by questioning the oldest people in town, some of whom were children of the early settlers and came to Otisfield with their parents. Holden also read old diaries, notably that of Samuel Knight, which disappeared, and visited old cemeteries and consulted many other records. If he had not done this and recorded it, this history would not have been written. We're very lucky that this exists at all, because many of these manuscript things have not been lasted. Holden also wrote one other book, very kind of a little pamphlet on the life of David Ray, his grandfather. And it was written, I believe, for a centennial celebration, some sort of a celebration of David Ray's birth. And I've got a copy of it here if anyone's interested in it. It's kind of a rare item. I think we have an original copy someplace. It's not terribly interesting. This is the interesting one. I'm going to tell you something about Grinfill Holden. He was born, as I said, in 1824 and had all Otisfield ancestors. Educational background was pretty good. He went to Gorham schools in Gorham and Auburn. He became an expert penman. He had the elegant penmanship which shows up in this book. And he taught, I just learned this yesterday, he taught penmanship at Gould Academy back in the days before computers, when they still have to learn to write. He also made trunks, stencils, and had a sawmill in Otisfield. But he was ambitious, and so as a young man, he moved to Lafayette, Wisconsin, where he became town clerk. And a few years later, he was working in the Treasury Department in Washington, D.C., and then he went to Columbia Law School, so very well educated for his day. 1866, he was admitted to the bar of the District of Columbia. Then he was restless and moved to Nebraska. But in his old life, he moved back to Otisfield and worked hard on this book. But unfortunately, in 1892, he was in his late 60s at that time, he had finished the book and went to the Otisfield town meeting, and they weren't any more generous then than they are now. And the warrant article was to see what sum of money the town would vote to raise to assist G.B. Holden or any suitable person he may designate to finish up and publish the history of Otisfield now underway. And they got voted down, they didn't give any money at all. Okay, so when Bill Spurr wrote his history, he did not make the mistake of going before the Otisfield voters. Bill Spurr was a notorious miser. Ben, you've probably got a story or two about how stingy he was. I've got the story about how he gave my mother-in-law a box of chocolates for a wedding present. And she was aghast. He had never given anything to anyone ever before. And then she lifted the cover of the box and discovered he'd taken out the first layer. There are lots of stories like that. But he was smart enough to know that, and I think Holden, he was related to the Holden. He was smart enough to know that if he wanted to get that history out, he was going to have to pay for it himself, and he did. To the town's credit, we have a selectman here, so I have to be nice. To the town's credit, a few years later, when that book was out of print, the town paid to have it reprinted. The original volume is covered with green. This one is red. If you've got a red one or brown one, that's the new edition. There were no changes. It's exactly as it was. And you can still buy that for $35 from the town office if you want. And it's a wonderful book. If you buy it, be sure to buy the index that goes with it, which I represent. Okay, so I'm going to move on away from Holden to the next Otisfield historian. And I had some problems, even including I have trouble with these names, because there's Grinfill and there's Granville. And they're related. I think they were first cousins, or they're very close in age. I'm quite sure his mother was a Holden or a Ray, or one of them. It's very close. Granville Fernald wrote a great deal, many articles dealing with Otisfield. They are reminiscences. They are not histories as such, but there's history here. And they are people he knew. They are experiences he had growing up. He is also very well educated. I'm trying to remember what his background is. He was the son of Otis and Sally Fernald, who lived, I believe, in Bolster's Mills. He was a carpenter, a carriage maker, and his father, whose name was Otis, also collected Otisfield material, genealogical and other material. Fernald ended up being a clerk in the Superior Court in Portland, and also worked in Washington, D.C. in the War Department and the Department of Interior. So he, too, like Grinfill Holden, was a well-educated, rather learned person. And like Grinfill Holden, late in life he returned to Maine and started cranking out these essays, which he published in the Oxford County Advertiser, Advertiser in Norway, Maine, from between 1912 and 19. This is also a source for Spurr. He used some of this material, and I am indebted to Edward Staples, sitting in the front row, who transcribed all these essays from the newspaper laboriously. He had to buy a new computer for it, and we wouldn't have them if he hadn't done that. This is also available for sale for $10. If anyone's interested, I think it's $10, maybe it's $12. So anyone interested, but these are not, as I said, it's not the facts in this book that strike me as interesting. What's interesting to me is the social life, the customs, the boyhood fun they had. For example, he and a group, stop me if I'm wrong, Evan, he and a group of kids from up on Cobb's Hill were having a battle with a rival group of boys from Scribner Hill, and they were making firebrands out of pine boughs and throwing them at each other. Now this is a different kind of amusement. It's not exactly trick or treating, and he said what fun it was. No wonder they didn't burn down the whole village. But that's what's good about this. Ed, do you want to say anything more about it? But these are worth reading. As I said, not so much the history. I'm not sure I quite put them in history, but Pam, do you have any feeling on that? You've read these. Yeah. Have I hit the highlights? Okay, good. All right. Now, I want to talk about I'm going to go back to Marguerite Lovewell again. I consider what she did to be kind of Rosetta Stones for the Otisfield history. She not only produced Holden's work, if this hadn't existed, that's all we would have. As a transitional piece, it's very important. We're grateful to have it, but that's not all she did. She also transcribed Mary Pride Knight's diary, the whole thing, all 36, 52, whatever it is, many, many volumes. And I don't think she did a terribly good job. She left a lot of stuff out. But nevertheless, that was the first thing we had about Mary Pride Knight. We didn't have the actual diary, we had the transcription. And that turned up in an historical society meeting when a former town clerk presented it. It's in a little booklet, just about like this. I didn't bring it tonight. And said, here, I thought you might like this. I was reading it to my mother the last few years at home. The town clerk really shouldn't have taken it home. It came very close to being lost forever, but it didn't. Anyway, we now have that transcription. It's nicely typed. She was a stenographer in Boston, but she came from Otisfield. She and her sister both went to Boston and became stenographers. She's a very good typist. But William Spurr used her stuff. I know he used her stuff. He used the Holden stuff that she had typed. He used the Mary Pride Knight stuff. He had access to all this. But here's what he says about her in his book. She died in 1942. The book came out between 1944 and 1950. That's what William Spurr said. She and her sister were public stenographers in Boston. She finally went insane and was in the state hospital in Foxborough, Mass, where she died. That's it. It doesn't see, Bill Spurr was not always very gracious and very generous to people whom he used, and that was kind of a shocking thing for me to read. Almost as bad as reading his own obituary. Okay. All right. Bill Spurr, moving on to Bill Spurr. We cannot avoid Bill Spurr. Those of you who knew him, Callie, you want to say anything about him?
Yes, he was certainly, I was born in 42, so that tells you what I knew of Bill Spurr, and I don't recall when I first remember him. But he was certainly eccentric, usually showed up down in the general store with shoes on, like a saddle shoe type thing, no socks, often kind of short, his pants didn't quite come to the top of his shoes. And quite often his ankles were quite soiled, I remember. The kids, you notice those kinds of things. I remember a story of my dad's, Ellis Stone, that talked about Bill, maybe it was part of his frugalness, but he loved to go down and spear suckers in the sucker brook. And he'd go down and spear large quantities, keep all he wanted. And nobody else really wanted them. So I think Dad said he salted them away and had barrels of these suckers that they ate,
They were cheap too.
No, but they were free, actually. That's quite cheap. And I have a wonderful picture, and I'll give it to you if I can find it again, of Bill Spurr sitting on the fender of an old black car, model something. And on the opposite fender is my French great aunt, Corinne Lassard. And they're sitting there posing for their picture. It's really quite a nice picture. So, do you have that?
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
I thought it was his wife, but it's
No,
not.
that's my Aunt Corinne, yeah.
The wife didn't last.
So last hire here was able to find his marriage certificate in Palm Beach, Florida, and the marriage lasted about a year. I think he was very attached to his mother. I think he brought his wife to Maine, and that did not go over very well. And you want to say
I
anything?
want to
Yes,
talk
yes,
about
please.
the film. I got the camera right here. Yeah, a couple of things about Will Spurr. My good friend, Reverend Dunstan. Anybody here remember Reverend Dunstan? Yes. Well, he told me that when Will's mother was on her deathbed, he went up there to visit her. And she turned to Will and she says, you know, Will, I would love to have a boiled egg. So Will said, okay, I'll go down to the store and get you one. So he was within walking distance of the Otisfield General Store there. I think it was Chet Lamb had it at the time. And so Bill Dunstan stayed with him, her. And pretty soon he came back and he sat down in the chair. His mother turned to him and said, well, Will, where's my egg? He says, Mother, do you know that they want 5 cents for an egg? She died without her egg. But without going into too many details, my grandmother was adopted by his uncle. And he assumed that he was going to inherit the farm, the Butler farm. He didn't. And without going into the details, I'll just say in a dispute over that, my grandmother hit him over the head with a broom all the way from the house to his car out on Rayville Road. And when he wrote the history of Otisfield, you'll find no Butlers or no Hamilton mentioned. I live right up on the corner here, and you will read that on the Scribner hillside lives the Whittams, Harry and Isidore and Helen and Ruthie and young Harry. I lived right across the street, my sister and I. We're not in that book because my mother was a butler.
Okay, thank you, Henry. Okay, moving on. I'm not going to spend a lot more time about Bill Spurr, but I want to make 3 points about him. Not a very well educated person. He had some education, probably high school, but compared to these other guys, no. And he probably didn't type either, like Marguerite Lovewell. But people forget that his first job was this book, not the history. He wrote this one first, the Vital Records. And he wrote this for the Maine Historical Society. They had standards that he had to adhere to. One of the standards, which Celeste Hires already went into, is you have to name your sources. Private Record 1, Gravestone Record, Otisfield Cemetery, Private Record 2, so forth and so on. And these records, these references are beside every entry in the book. That is discipline that he learned from, I think he learned that tough discipline from doing this book first. The book was published in, I think, about 1944, and the history was published very shortly after, 2 or 3 years afterwards. We don't have a date for that book, sometime between 1944 and 1950, I'm not quite sure when.
How far does it go back? To the beginning of Otisfield residence?
Yes. Doesn't talk about the Indians. He's not interested in Indians.
No.
There are other things he doesn't. I've already talked about. My second point was that he doesn't write narrative history. I've already made that point, I think, pretty well. He collected material, he put it together, sometimes in an odd way. And that is why it is so important to have a good index. And that's why I wrote an index to it, because you simply could not find your way through the book. There's too much material in there that gets lost. Without a good index, you can't retrieve it. Okay. Yes.
Did he ever use any of the information that was in that notebook that I gave you, that he gave his mother a notebook for Christmas so she could record the history of the town of Otisfield?
Not that I found. No, not that I found. But who knows? because he got information from a lot of places. He doesn't always tell you. Sometimes he does. If it came from Holden, Holden gives his references, gives his sources. Holden will say, according to Sam Knight, such and such happened. If he's quoting Holden, he also says Sam Knight's diary says such and such happened. Sam Knight's diary doesn't exist. The Patch diary doesn't exist, as far as I know. And unless it turns up, someone may call me, you know, and say, I've got some old stuff, some old papers, and we don't want them. You never know, but I really doubt it. Okay, the third point, and maybe the most important point, is that the book is very funny. And it's intentionally funny. It's funny in a Bert and I kind of way. And I'm going to read you some of these stories. First was about Captain Jonathan Britton. This is also in Holden. Captain Jonathan Britton was acquainted with Nathaniel Hawthorne, the author, who lived in Raymond and greatly enjoyed Mr. Britton's quaint ways and ready wit. One time, Mr. Hawthorne gave him some long red potatoes, a new species to plant. Meeting again in the fall after the harvest, Hawthorne asked him what he thought of the new potatoes. Well, to speak truly, said Mr. Britton, one end of the potatoes is pretty poor, and the other end ain't fit to eat. Well, that's a Bert and I. You're all familiar with Bert and I. Okay. But then Holden, in his rendition, said, as a phrase, the other end, after saying the other end ain't fit to eat, Holden adds, a blunt answer and more truthful than it was courteous to this distinguished friend. Spurr leaves that out. Spurr, I think, had a better sense of his audience. When to shut up. Okay, this is another one about Mr. Britton. 1824, Mr. Britton was elected to the legislature, which then held its sessions in Portland. While in Portland, he boarded at Dodge's Tavern. He wore his homemade clothes, cut out of homemade cloth, and one day a city member who estimated men by their clothes looked him over from head to foot, and thinking to have a little sport, asked Mr. Britton if his town wasn't rather short for stock. Oh, replied Mr. Britton, they have plenty of smarter men than I, but they had nothing fit to wear to the legislature. This is word for word from Holden. Okay, here's another one. Also about Captain Britton. One day, Enoch Turner, Henry Turner, and Mr. Britton were out fox hunting with dogs. Captain Britton was alone by the side of the road with his gun when a stranger who was riding past asked Mr. Britton, what are you doing with your guns? I am a member of the Otisfield Fox Hunting Club, Mr. Britton said promptly, and on duty. What luck, said the stranger. Good, said Mr. Britton. When we get this, in 2 more, we will have 3. Okay, this one is my favorite. It's about Leonard Edwards, and this one is not in Holden, and it's not in Lovewell. Did he make it up? Who knows? Leonard Edwards lived at the end, he lived pretty much where the Edwards do now, Forest Edwards Road. He lived at the corner of the road in Dunkertown where his son Levi did. The house has since burned. He went barefoot most of the time, which he did about every day, as he never got any more wood than he burned from day to day. And one day, one of the oxen stepped on his bare foot and stood there jamming it into the mud, so Leonard could not move it. After a moment, he said, "Get off of my foot before I strike you." That is my favorite. Okay, his writing style is very plain, He uses lots of run-on sentences. He never uses apostrophes. Sometimes this leads to a little confusion, but he's consistent. He is not, what's refreshing about Spurr, he is not flowery compared to Grinfill, Holden, and Granville, Fernald, who love to embellish things. For example, he doesn't use much emotion in his writing. He understates things. For example, writing about John Sawyer, what I'm interested in. He said he married 1792 Hannah, daughter of Richard Edwards. He went insane before 1812 and had to be kept in a cage. He escaped in 1820 and went to Bray and did some damage for which the town voted to pay $7. He was on the town for many years. That's it. Pretty spare writing, concise. Okay. Scribner Jesse. In the early 90s, he and his brother, give me that name, Borden, went to Florida and built a mill on the St. Johns River north of Palatka. It did not prove profitable, and when the freshet of 1896 damaged the mills at home, he and his brother came home and left the Florida mill to the mercies of the jungle calm, and they never went back or sold it. That's it. Just cut and dried. But once in a while, his personality does come through. You have to watch out for it. For example, in the genealogy section, he's always very critical of people that left town and went to Wisconsin or Ohio, and he's always very pleased when they did not make out well. And then this one, it really takes sides sometimes. Writing about the 1931 town meeting, he wrote, there was a lot of controversy over the location of the new schoolhouse at East Otisfield. That's the one right down here. Mr. G.T. Elliott offered to give a lot beside the community hall, but a certain clique wanted to build on a lot Ed Lamb owned. There were 3 special town meetings about it, but the clique finally prevailed and paid Ed Lamb $250 for his lot and built the schoolhouse there. So Spurr is a lot of fun. He is a good historian, and I feel honored to talk about him. Not a great man, not a brilliant person, a very sound historian. Very few. There are errors in his book, but not very many. Is that true, Ben? Yeah, that's true. Okay. And now I'm going to talk about the last historian. It was myself, Jean Hankins, and I haven't prepared this very much, except to say that my husband and I retired to Otisfield in '93, and I had my PhD in hand, and I was raring to go, and I arrived on Ethel Turner's doorstep, and said, she was then president of the society, and I said, here I am, ready to go. And she said, and she was not. I said, I have this good paper I've written on John Sawyer and his cage and how he went insane. And she went, oh. I did not know that they had just finished a school play here in which they knocked themselves out. They wrote all the material. They had a series of sketches of Otisfield history. We showed that film a year or 2 ago. Vicki was here for that. And they had the whole town involved with making costumes and writing skits. It was little skits on town history, including that little story about the fox hunt. I'm sure that was it. There was a great, there was a skit about the great boat ride out into Thompson Pond. There were various little skits. But it had just been a killer to put on and organize, and they didn't want to talk about any more programs at that point. And then I arrived full of everything. And eventually, Ethel did get a meeting together, and I did read my paper about John Sawyer. And I'm proud to say I did publish it, and I remember giving it to Marianne Moore to read because I was so new in Otisfield that I wasn't sure how things worked in a small town, and she made a couple of corrections on it actually, so it did get published in Maine History. And then the other two things I did early was gravestone descriptions. Actually, I started working on this when I was here just in the summers, and I had nothing to do in the summers except take care of 4 small children. And so I would transcribe one cemetery a summer. And so there are 14 or 15 in town. So finally I had them all done and finished it. After we retired here, by that time we had computers, and I was able to, had to retype it, which introduced some errors, unfortunately. And now on the internet. So Marilyn Strout put it on the internet together with her some pictures of the gravestone. She took camera shots of it. So that is available if anyone wants it on the internet.
How is it referenced on the internet?
I'm sorry?
How is it referenced on the internet? Wow.
I can't tell you, if you look under Elmwood Cemetery, Otisfield, you'll find it. But the problem is, there's no index. The index is, once again, if you know you have an ancestor from Otisfield, but you don't know what cemetery he's buried in, you're going to have to, but I have an index here. So anyway, I won't tell you about that. Okay, and then the other thing I did, I got so frustrated trying to find things in Bill Spurr that I wrote an index. But this was something I knew how to do, and I had a computer program for it, and it didn't take that long. And I went to the Historical Society with the idea that maybe they would like to publish this book. And they said, well, we have $72 in our treasury. So my husband and I loaned the society. We paid to have it printed. And then as we sold copies, they paid me back, and it's now, they paid me back my $1,000. And so the Historical Society now gets proceeds for the index. So that's that. And
I'd just like to say that's very, very helpful.
it is helpful.
If you have the history, you don't have the index,
One thing that's
you're
in
missing
here.
a lot.
One thing I will point out that's in here, particularly if you live in Otisfield, I indexed the lots.
Yeah.
These are the original lots. So if you look under lot number 80, it says George Pierce buys. He's the first settler in Otisfield. James Otis acquires. John Pride sells to Robert Knight. You got the whole history of the transaction of that lot. And so that's very helpful if you're doing genealogy. So, okay.
How many did you have printed?
I'm sorry, how many?
How many did you have printed?
I don't know. I've got a lot left. Let's put it that way. Okay, and then over the years, I got interested in a lot of things that Bill Spurr was not interested in. He wasn't interested. For example, he wasn't interested in social history. He wasn't interested in how the town took care of its poor. I was. And so I did some more essays. I did, I'm trying to remember their names of them. I did one called Over the Hill to the Poorhouse, the Otisfield Town Farm, which existed until 1924 or so. And that was a very interesting paper. I did not publish that, but that's on the internet. And I don't know how you find it on the internet. Town Farm Otisfield, I guess. Yeah, but it is, but it doesn't have the footnotes. The internet doesn't always publish the footnotes, and they didn't get, so you have to come to me for those. And then I did a third paper on Otisfield poor, which got the poor into the 20th century. I traced one family that was on poor relief in Otisfield for about 100 years. One family, all of the descendants, kind of in and out of the system, and how they, I'm not sure they manipulated the system. They took advantage of the system, let's put it that way. And that got published. I had to change the name of the family. Interesting paper though, because I did so much research all over Maine. this family was in Norway, they were in Rumford, they were in Well, they just kept moving, but always got poor leave from Otisfield, even though they didn't live here. And it was a very interesting situation. In the middle of the research, I got a phone call from someone who said her name was Janie Walker. Well, the Walker, that's not her real name, the Walker families when I was investigating. She said, you know, I heard that you were doing something on this. And oh my God. She said, and so we started talking, and I said, well, do you know about your brother Bill? And she said, no. It turned out her father had 5 wives and children by all 5 wives, and they didn't know each other. And so I was able to put them together, kind of, and I don't think they ever found out about the paper, but Janie Walker came to the house, and almost illiterate. She was kind of a sad case, and the guy with her was also a sad case, and I finally got tired of talking about Janie's family. I said to the fellow with her, well, how's your family? He said, don't ask. So that's about all I have to say, except that I will say that having the Historical Society has made things better about not losing these important documents. There is a place now. It's not a case of when Bill Spurr died, he left his historical records in his will to the Maine Historical Society, because he had worked with them when he wrote this book. They got none of them. They got nothing. A distant cousin was his heir. And years later, some of the Otisfield town records started turning up in Portland bookstore. My in-laws went to Portland and purchased the documents. They're not supposed to be sold, and brought them back to town. I think the town gave them $200 that they bought for the paper. That kind of thing, and they almost certainly have come from Bill Spurr, they think. And lots of other stuff. Maybe the Patch Diary, maybe Samuel Knight's diary that I would love to see. But now we've got a historical society, and to take care of them, we've been getting a lot more good stuff, including these recent gifts. So thank you for listening.
Very nice.
I'm supposed to ask if there are any questions or discussion or anything. Anyone want to tell me more Bill Spurr stories? Okay.
I know a story about his house, not really a story, it's
Go ahead.
a reality.
Go ahead.
Because, Dad used to hang around all these places and knew all of these characters. And that old house had a spring that came up under the kitchen counter. And that was where their water source was. And I'm not sure what it still is there. And they lift up the counter section and get their water out that way. And then I remember that down across the lawn, directly in front of the kitchen, there was a barrel, and the same spring bubbled up through that barrel. And horses used to drink out of it, and so did I with my horse at the same time. And so that always intrigued me, that wonderful spring that just came up into the kitchen and then also had exit down there. Wonderful water. Do you remember that, Bill?
Oh yeah, I used to drink because my family we visited the Chases across the road.
Yeah.
They had one of the first TVs in town,
Yeah.
and so we used to go up there and watch TV. I got a story. When I was in London in the military, I got a letter that Ralph Lamb was coming to town, London. So I met him down in London, and I'd have a lot of stories to be able to do a thing on Ralph Lamb about that meeting. But anyway, he told me a few things. He was the executor of Will Spurr's will. And he said to me, I tell you, buddy, I found some pictures of women in that house and I don't know what to do with them.
I would like to finish. on Bill Spurr's will, which is very interesting, if I can find my notes. I've got too many notes, that's the problem. He left, the most interesting thing he did was leave a sum of money, was it $10,000? A lot of money to the town to be used to give to any child in town born and given the middle name Spurr. And the interest was to go toward that child. It was more than one, they would divide the interest between them. And over the years, a number of children have taken advantage of that opportunity. Over the last few, I haven't heard of any. Have you heard of any? Yeah. Did you know about that? Did you know about that provision? The Spurr, it's called the Spurr Middle Name Fund or something like that.
I used to list it in the town report, I don't know if it's
Still
It
is.
still is?
He gave money to the East Otisfield Free Baptist Church to be used at the Joe Holden Day picnic to buy strawberry ice cream. Strawberry ice cream.
And peanuts.
He left money to the Elmwood Cemetery, a certain amount to be used for the for the maintenance of the Civil War monument, which he and his mother gave to the cemetery. But he specified that a certain formula was to be used in the cleaning, so much linseed oil, so much turpentine, so much this and that, and no other. He left quite a bit of money for his day to Stevens Memorial Hospital, $10,000. I don't know where he got his money, but considering the kind of work he did in town, I don't know, but he seemed to have some money, maybe because he never spent any. So that's all I have now. I did want to get that in.
Okay, we can take a little time to chat, and there's cookies, and there's juice over there, and there's a donation bottle.
There's also that box has things